Okay, so as you all know, we've been working on the police reform and reinvention initiative for some time. We've had a lot of engagement from the community and the committee that's been designated to work on this project. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Richard Brady from Matrix to provide a presentation on the report that the committee has produced.
Thank you very much. Mayor Levin, members of the board, I was the project manager in this assignment, and with me I've got other people who will be participating in this presentation. From Matrix, we've got Marika Lopez, Ian Brady, and John Scruggs. And from the working committee, we've got Gabby Hamilton, Maita Garcia, Jennifer Cabrera, and Kendall Buchanan. So we're all going to participate in this. We're very mindful of the time, the late hour. This is our first opportunity to provide a summary of the report that we have collectively put together here. So we thought we'd put together a short summary for you and answer your questions. So if I can share my screen, I've got a PowerPoint in support of this. Okay. Oops. So just to start off and give an overview for the project, in the wake of the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, the governor's office issued Executive Order 203, which created in every community in New York State Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative. The process started in the summer. The board created a working committee and authorized the hiring of a consultant, which was us, to facilitate this process for Austining. We have been meeting since we started this project involving Matrix in November. The committees and various subcommittees we've created have met several times. And so, significant public input was developed as we went through this, which I'll describe in a second. So we had 5 public input sessions as part of this just before the holidays and early this month. We started the process with a Spanish language meeting, had a general open meeting on a weekend, had a meeting that was for the African American community, meeting of LGBTQ plus community, and a meeting with Austining High School students as well. Overall, over 200 people participated in the public listening sessions that we had, and we got a lot of input. We also had an online survey, both in English and Spanish, to obtain broader input from the community, and there were over 800 responses to the community survey. The report has an extensive listing of the input that we got from all of these public mechanisms, but key themes that came from this process included the need to address bias in policing and the need to have police accountability to the public. As a transition to the suggested recommendations that arose from this, I want to say a few more words about the working committee. So we met several times from November until just a week ago to discuss the process as well as to develop the suggested recommendations here. An important part of this process, so we could delve deeply into this, the areas that were defined by Executive Order 203, and to come up with some suggested recommendations for consideration by the board, were in 4 areas. Governance, which also includes various other elements associated with transparency and other aspects, looking at policies and procedures in policing, looking at internal operations and practices, and hiring and training are the areas that we mostly focused in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to pairs of a representative from our working committee and from Matrix Consulting Group to talk about the things that we've come up with for your consideration. And we're going to start out first with Jennifer Cabrera and Ian. We're going to talk about oversight, compliance, and transparency. So Jennifer, do you want to take it over? Oh, I skipped governance. Thank you. So is Jennifer not on? Okay, Ian, do you want to take this then?
Okay, so the first of these series of recommendations that we made in the subcommittee, or suggested recommendations that we looked at in the subcommittee, is to create a new commission or a new board that would function as the Police Board of Commissioners. And so the purpose of that would be to review policies, to be able to have OPD report various metrics, things like the diversity of people that the department is looking to hire, stop data, things like that. Essentially providing a board who's really has a dedicated focus in reviewing police activity, reviewing changes to police policy, et cetera. So we looked at a number of different ways of how that could work, how that could be structured. And ultimately kind of settled on one that would be composed of 5 community members in addition to 2 members who serve on the Board of Trustees. And so 2 different alternatives for how people could be elected to the Board of Commissioners outside of the Board of Trustees slots. So one could be either the mayor nominating, the village board approving, simple majority, or to have it so that initially it functions in that manner, but thereafter elections take place to elect the members. So it's not determined yet as far as how often the board would meet, but OPD would be making regular reports. So oversight. So in this area, we looked a lot at the CPCRB, how it functions as a complaint review board, and how we can make it work better. So the first of these is to remove OPD representation on the CPCRB, so that it would instead be a total of 5 civilian seats with 1 alternate in addition. So the reason for this is that for an oversight board like this to really achieve its goal of being something that develops trust in the police complaint process, that develops trust in police internal accountability, it really truly does need to be external and independent. It's very uncommon for there to be police representation as voting members on a complaint review board. Because if you have police on that board, then it's not truly an external board. By having it be external, it's able to function as that kind of independent check that in most cases throughout the country comes to the same conclusion as the police internal process, thus kind of giving that extra degree of trust. So in addition, we looked at one alternative that would cost additional, which would be to hire an outside investigator to review complaint cases rather than having it be a police investigator give the presentation to the board. This is something that other jurisdictions in Westchester County are looking at. So there's opportunity to either have it on like a investigator on like a per diem basis or something like that, but it's one alternative to look at further. So in addition, actually codifying it that the village council or the deputy is in attendance at every CPCRB meeting. It's our understanding that that has been taking place since COVID, but just actually codifying that, making sure that that's something that continues in the future. Additionally, changing the codes so that the location of the meetings is can be at other places besides at OPD facilities, just again, ensuring that it's an external independent process, that there's no either perception or kind of image of it being part of the police internal process. Additionally, making it easier to file a complaint, we thought was important. So increasing the time that anyone can file a complaint from 90 to 120 days, having different alternatives for being able to submit complaints, whether it's online or dropping a complaint form, not at the police station, but at another village property. Additionally, having it so that the time frame for complaints is actually specified, and additionally that if the complaint takes longer than 30 days to be investigated, that police provide justification for why that extended time frame was given.
Hi, I am back. I'm so sorry. I had stepped away to use the restroom.
Do you want to take it from here? Transparency?
Absolutely. So on the transparency piece, one of the the big things that we've noticed other police departments are doing is the names and contact information, at least for high-ranking officers, are on their websites. Those are published. So we'd like to do that, you know, starting from the rank of lieutenant and above, just so that people know who they can contact in the police department. I think a lot of people do have the chief's contact information, but not necessarily other officers within the OPD who are in leadership positions. The second thing that we're seeing in quite a lot of other municipalities, and this is around the country, is that they are publishing their policy manuals online so that anyone can view it whenever they'd like to. So that's really a great way to increase transparency and trust in the department. And additionally, because we know that not everyone has internet access at the same rates and may not be able to get that information online, we'd like to make it possible to get a hard copy either at the police department or at Village Hall and make that free of charge, because more than likely, if you don't necessarily have internet access, you may also not be able to pay for a large, you know, printed copy of the policy manual. We don't think that'll be a lot of people who are looking for that, but we want to make it an option for those who might. And the last one is to tie in with that recommendation that we have on governance. We'd like to have the new Board of Commissioners having a role in reviewing the policies of the police department. That's something that has mostly been left to OPD on its own. So we'd like to have a little bit more public input on that. So most of these recommendations that we've made in this section, in the governance section, have been the result of the survey that we did and of the public meetings that we had, where people mentioned, you know, that it was difficult to make complaints. They weren't really confident that if they made a complaint, that it would be handled appropriately. And then lastly, there were a lot of questions just about, you know, how the department was working. So we'd like to get that information out to people on the website so that they feel like they have more information, and you know, just having that information can increase trust.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. The next area where we took the Executive Order 203 and the things that they wanted local governments to focus on relates to policies and procedures. And one of our subcommittees dealt with that, and Gabrielle Hamilton will be summarizing that along with John Scruggs. So Gabby?
Hi. So it was a very interesting group. We had about 140 policies to review, and some of them were 2 pages, but some of them were like 6 or 13 or 15. There were a couple that would even more than that. So our committee was not able to have the full discussions of every single policy. There were 2 very important ones on the children and the crisis team that we still have to work on, and there were a couple that we have to discuss. But we did come up with some blanket ideas about language, and so as the previous committee, we also agreed that the policies and procedures needs to be on the website, because you know, that's best practice, and as it turns out, that's what community members would like as well. We also feel we should develop anti-bias free and anti-racist policing policies, and what that means is that literally in each policy there were places where you could stick in one sentence that would just say include that language, so that it's comprehensive throughout. It repeats. The third thing was to reduce the perception of cooperation. The department should modify its general orders so that OPD officers will not respond with ICE unless they're called to the location. And you know, this of course was something that people felt very strongly about, and so we're going to have a firm policy on that moving forward. And then develop a policy to require reporting misconduct by department personnel, because as the previous committee also talked about, people were having a lot of difficulty making complaints. And so we wanted to make that easier for everyone.
Okay, thank you, Gabby. John, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that covers all of it at this point.
Okay, the third area was rather broad. It related to internal operations and practices within the police department. And our committee dealt with a wide range of things, and we have a wide range of recommendations. So we're going to have Kendall Buchanan take the lead in making a summary of this part of the subcommittee work.
Thank you, Richard. The Internal Operations and Practices Committee came up with a few very interesting and unique suggestions. The first one being to work with the Westchester County neighboring communities and nonprofit agencies to develop mental health, homeless, and substance abuse crisis response units. We felt that that was very important, would give us a lot of support, for our police department in those issues. Also to fully provide officers with crisis intervention training to improve response. We also dealt with creating a voluntary response registry which would assist emergency communications and responders. This has been effectively done down in Yonkers. We looked at one of their programs, and it has worked pretty effectively down there. So we thought that it could be a pretty good idea to have. To implement new or improve the existing community policy efforts, including police officer liaisons with community groups, greater presence at the community events, involved more meaningful presence in the Ossining school system. And a lot of the recommendations that came out of that were specific. So specifically, we thought about establishing a permanent coalition comprised of residents and police officers to work together specifically on community policing. The coalition would be comprised of 3 residents from each segment of the community, with one police officer for every 3 residents. The main purpose of the coalition would be to ensure and define application and concept of the community policing in their various segments of the community. Also to find creative ways of community engagement in the area of social events, as well as social service efforts. Also to explore avenues of outreach and new approaches to the areas of the community most prone to criminal activity. And finally, to explore efforts to improve profile of policing as perceived by youth in order to promote career possibilities for youth, primarily in the high school ages. Those were some of the things that came out of that. We also dealt with the Spanish-speaking population to develop a public awareness campaign in both English and Spanish to explain the OPD's role with respect to ICE activities. I think that was touched on before. And to develop an officer mental health program that includes counseling with teletherapy options and early intervention program.
Okay, thank you, Kendall. I think unlike almost any of the other recommendations that have been made in this process, this is one of the areas that you can't do on your own. Alternative response is going to take a cooperative effort with either the county or neighboring communities or nonprofit agencies or some combination of that. And so as a result, while some of these suggested recommendations can be accomplished in a relatively short time frame, others are going to take a longer period of time, and this would be one of them. So our last area is hiring and training. And so Mayna Garcia and John Scruggs again are going to summarize this.
Great. So I was on the hiring and training subcommittee as well as other subcommittees, but I'll be presenting for this one. So one of the things we talked about on the committee that we also got, as Jennifer mentioned, we did get our information based off of what we heard from the community meetings, as well as what we read in the recommendations. Once we saw what was on the surveys. The first one is to work to increase diversity in the department, hiring, and on promotional processes. So we want to make sure that our police department, our police force looks and represents our community better. In terms of statistics, we have, sorry, it was right here. So currently our police department is 71.9% white, and 35.7% of the village is white. So that is not a number that represents our community. Same for Hispanic, is 44.3% of the whole village, and only 15.7% in the police department. And for the Black community, it's 13.5% of the whole village and only 12.2% in the police department. So we want to make sure that our police department is more representative of our community, as well as the languages spoken here. Our police department currently has 8 Spanish-speaking police officers, 1 Portuguese, 1 Belarusian. And so we want to make sure that our police department also has the languages and the percentages that amount to our community. The second point is that the work with Austining High School to start a program to introduce high school students to the Austining Police Department. So we did have a meeting with Austining High School students, and they did have a lot of concerns as well as suggestions. And so one of the things that I mostly took from it was that Austining High School students did not feel safe when around Austining police officers in school or even around the community. And so they don't understand their presence or their role in the schools. And so we need to bridge that gap, right? And make sure that they understand why they're there. Are they really helping? Is the role of the school resource officer really necessary, or is there something that we need to do as a community and a school district to bridge that gap, because it's not helping right now with the community relationship. And then the third is the types of trainings that we feel the Austining Police Department would benefit from. And we're recommending that that's done on a multi-year training plan. As Mr. Brady said, it's not something that can be done very quickly. So we are suggesting that it be done in a multi-year plan, so that we can have at least a certain amount of officers trained in each area. And then we're going to try and come up with a time frame of by when we would want them to be trained in the whole police department in these areas. So we have anti-racism in policing, implicit bias, de-escalation, procedural justice, cultural competency, handling protest, and crisis intervention training. And actually handling protest was suggested by, handling protest and crisis intervention training were both suggested by one of the police officers. So interestingly, OPD also feels like they would benefit from more training and would like more training in certain areas.
Okay, John, do you have anything to add?
No, sir, that covers all of what we talked about.
Okay, where do we go from here? So first of all, obviously there's a lot more in the report. We tried to make a brief summary, but a comprehensive summary as well. I think it's important to recognize that this is not the end of the process, but it's not the beginning either. There's lots of work that remains to be done, and a lot of it needs to be done in the next couple of months, and that's going to fall in a couple of different areas. Working backwards from the date that the state has required to get each community's response to Executive 203 is April 1st. So we have 2 months to publicly review this report and have it accepted after review by the board themselves. So the first step is our public review process. And we have come up with a process of having public meetings on this draft report on February 6th, February 20th, and February 27th. These are all Saturday mornings. One's not too far away. One's a general session, one is focusing on the African American community, and one is in Spanish. In addition, as we have been doing through the entire process that we've been involved in, we created an email address that people have been making comments on, and telephone hotline, both in English and Spanish, and we've gotten many messages, and we're going to keep them open throughout the review period. So once the review period is over, then we turn it over to the board. Then there's a public acceptance part of it. And looking at your schedule, the process that seems to work and still have public review of the report is that we get you a revised report based on what we've given you so far. And after the review of the public, we give that to you by March 5th. And then we have another work session, much like this one, on March 10th to review it. That would give us some opportunity to take your input and come up with a final report. And then you would review that at a legislative session on March 17th. If that time frame is a little too tight, we have the option of a special meeting on March 24th. And that still is going to be pretty tight to get it by April 1st. This is doable. I think we've got a plan to make it happen. But as I said, the ball is starting to roll now that we have given you the draft report. So on that, let me turn it over to you and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Richard, and everyone else. So nice to see you all again, and for the hard work. My first question is always, do we need to keep this up, or do we want to go? Well, I guess we're going back to gallery. We'll take that question right off the board. So thank you, everyone. Really amazing. We've had amazing work and the amount of work that you've done. There are many, many, many municipalities, and I have called some that did a couple of public meetings. They're already done. Did a couple of public meetings. They've got half a dozen bullet points. Look, Omar Lopez had stated this months ago. New York State is made up of communities that have 38 people for 55 square miles in upstate New York, the smallest municipality, to Buffalo, which is a college town that's gone through a lot of issues, to Brooklyn, New York, and we can go through all the B's and the ABCs, and they're all different, and we're different, and that's why it's done at a very local level. And we're looking at a lot of the faces that represent the working committee that was appointed. The mayor and Omar Lopez have been intimately involved representing the board, and I took over as mayor on the 1st, and therefore I have joined the meeting. So this is great stuff. I have a couple of comments. The general rule of thumb is to go around the room to the other trustees to see if there's some big questions. The process will be discussed at the end, but anybody have macro? It's the first time we're seeing it and hearing it. This is the sort of on the timeline, this is the first step to present to the Board of Trustees, because it is the board that ultimately votes. It's not an up and down vote generally. It is more public hearings, and we're going to vote on the plan that we want to have. There may be some additions made, some things taken off. We don't know yet. We're starting the conversation now from the committee. Anybody, my colleagues on the board with questions, comments? I'm sure there are.
So I can start. I've been like the mayor said, I've been working on this since its inception, and also want to extend gratitude to all the folks on the working committee and everybody else in the community that has contributed. One question that I have that is not yet clear to me is, we have this plan that we have a draft of, and there are the recommendations that you heard tonight. Those recommendations were a result of the all of the work that had been done up to this point. And they were done in terms of like responding to issues that whomever it is that's making these observations is seeing. Now it's come to us, and when it gets to the Board of Trustees, you go from a kind of divergent path where you start from an idea and you come up with as many ideas as you can to try to solve issues, to now a convergent place. So we are trying to figure out what are we actually going to be doing. And so my question with that unnecessarily long preamble is, whatever is in the plan, does that mean that we as the Board of Trustees are saying to the state, yes, we are going to be doing all of these things? Or are we saying, here are all of the things that the community wants us to do, here are the recommendations, we may do some, we may not do others, but this is what the community asked us to do? To me, that question is important because it would really shape. You take one of the first recommendations, which is a change that we have to change in our village charter, from making the Board of Trustees the police commissioners to having this additional body. So if we were to move forward with just that recommendation, much less any of the others, it would require a lot of conversation, much more than we would have time, my sense is, to hammer out between now and the end of March. So that question is starting with Richard and then to whomever.
Okay, thank you. I'll take the first crack at it. So as I said toward the end of this presentation, the conclusion of this process initiates another process. So this is indeed, as you put it, a series of policy commitments or initiatives or goals that the board supports for implementation for the village. So this is not an implementation plan for the village. That has to come next. And whether it's the working committee or some other committee or a committee of the board, that some process needs to initiate, which takes each of the areas that you have accepted as part of the plan, a process for developing decisions about who's going to do what, by when, how, what kind of steps need to happen, when you expect it to be implemented, what you expect at the other end. So that process comes after that.
Right, but I think my main question though is, there's a difference between, because that makes a lot of sense, but there's a difference between setting up this new commission. Like, how do you do it? Obviously, that's not going to be in this plan because that's part of the implementation plan. But
Right.
Should that happen at all, maybe that's something that we as a Board of Trustees go, you know what, we don't want to do that.
Maybe not.
So then does it get part of it? Does it get added as an addendum? Like, here are helpful suggestions or recommendations from the committee or from this process that the board isn't choosing to implement at this point, but that maybe future boards may want to, or whatever. Your thoughts?
I don't think there's any clear experience in other communities that answer your question, because they've gone in different directions. I've looked at many of them across the state, because many of them predate us, and some of them are 15 pages long, and some of them are 300 pages long, and everything in between. So most of them are much more general and much less specific than what we've come up with here. But none of them have an implementation process. But so sometimes the board action is the appendix.
Got it. So I guess what would be helpful to me, because what I can see happening is the committee and the community going through all this effort, right, resulting in all these recommendations, and then we as the Board of Trustees say half of these are either too expensive or unviable or we're not interested or whatever, and then you end up with half of them, and then the community goes, but wait a minute, that's not what we signed up for. You didn't listen to the community, you know. So I just want to be clear on the outset before we start making any edits to this thing as a board, what that would look like.
So let me give you an example.
Oh,
of
I'm
one.
sorry.
Let's take the shared service idea on the joint response on the mental health, homelessness, and those kinds of situations. You don't know what can come out of that. You don't know if any of your neighbors are interested. You don't know if it's financially feasible. You don't know if the county is willing to have differential capabilities based on a community that wants to have this kind of service versus another one that doesn't. But you can at least, this is a goal if you feel that this is important, and you can say, yes, police officers, even with CIT, crisis intervention training, don't have all the skills and programmatic connections that somebody who comes from that background has. So you get to a process where you test the waters in the region and with the county and look at the financial feasibility and make a decision later. But this could still be a goal in the report.
Trustee Lopez.
If I may, thank you, Stuart. I actually think that there is an actual path. Stuart, do you want to share some thoughts?
Well, the point I wanted to make, Mayor and Trustee Lopez, to answer your question, and it's clear in the governor's guidance document at the very end, the board is here now to review the recommendations, hear what the public has to say, revise those recommendations, and if they're not adopting certain recommendations from the working committee, to explain why they haven't adopted those recommendations. The recommendations are not simply, we didn't just get a 57-page report and we slapped the village's cover on it and we send it up to Albany with a certification from the mayor. It's not how it works at all. There must be a determination by this board as to which of those recommendations, and perhaps others that might come through the public process, are to be considered and to be followed up on. So that's important. I'm not going to go through the individual ones here. There are some which have significant legal issues within them, which create their own problems. And that's something I will discuss with the board, because that's a matter that has to be gone through. But it is important to note that ultimately the decision on which recommendations formulate the plan is that of the Board of Trustees. And but it is important to communicate to the public, and I include in that the working committee, which recommendations were taken up on and which were not, and those which were not, why they were not, because that's what the governor's report, the governor's guidance document provides.
Thank you.
Omar, you muted. Was that your single question slash comment?
Yeah, I'd like to give space for my colleagues.
Okay. I'm sort of looking at the gallery. I'm seeing Dana. Did you have something to add, or am I just seeing? You're on mute.
All right. We're talking, so there would be a lot of civilian oversight. There would be the Citizen Complaint Review Board, which would be all civilians, right? And then there would be, if you were to do a new police commission, that would be civilians as well, right? Plus a couple of board of trustees, and that would eventually become an elected position, right? And I think there was another place where there would be civilian oversight. So I'm just, I think that, which is fine. I mean, that's fine, but I just worry there could be overlap and redundancies in some of these oversight committees. The other thing is the voluntary response registry. What is that?
It's designed to have information available to emergency responders, not just police, also firefighters and emergency medical personnel, about the residents in a house, for example, where there may be somebody with special mental health needs, so that they need to be aware about factors, about reactions from people as they respond, that they should not misinterpret as a hostile action, as has happened in many communities around the country.
So the registry is a household would go on and say, we have this situation. If there's a problem, please be aware of that.
Yes.
It would be exactly. The household that goes on. And
it's a voluntary, and it would be the household, yes.
because I know there's been a lot of issues with mental health calls or that are mental health issues, and they escalate into
Exactly.
criminal situations, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, those were, I think the ICE, is a very emotional situation. I've heard the chief explain why they go on the ICE, why they go with ICE, or why they go to the same location. And he had a pretty compelling reason, and it wasn't that they're participating or helping in any way. It's that they're observing, and they're basically witnesses. And if something goes wrong, they're there to observe. Now, I don't know if that's something, and I thought his explanation was it wasn't something I'd heard before, that a lot of people didn't seem to, that they felt the police were complicit with ICE, and that wasn't. So I think that's definitely something to go into a little bit more, why they began going to the locations where ICE was showing up. I know that ICE is a federal agency and can do whatever they want, right?
Correct.
So they're pretty much the bosses in any situation that they appear in. But hopefully there's some sort of happy medium, because the sense that they can come in and there's no one really observing what they're doing, and actually, to me, is maybe not the worst thing that there be, but I think that the awareness, though, the feeling is that it's more than observing, it's participating, and there has to be a way to sort this out that everybody can be happy with.
Well, everyone may not be happy, but there's two out there.
People can, I certainly am no fan of ICE coming in and dragging our residents
Right.
out of their houses, and that, no. But I imagine things can go terribly wrong sometimes.
Sure.
So I think that's something that we really need to pay attention to.
And our recommendation is not to have no response on the part of the police department. Sometimes they are needed to help. But there's two elements to our dealing with the ICE issue here. One is making sure that there is a policy about which defines what their support is, and it's communicated to the public. Because everything you said shows that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what that role is. And so you need a public education program to make people aware of what the policy is and develop that policy first.
That's it. That's all.
I'm just going to piggyback off of that. And I do agree about the policy with ICE, but the whole purpose is that they observe, because there's a case in point where they got a call, and before this all was initiated, that they would, they're not escorting them, they're just observing. So there's a lot of misconception out there of what's actually going on. So they're observing what's going on instead of running into a hostile situation, not knowing who's who, and they're there for the protection of the civilians around what's going on, because you never know what could happen. Again, there's a lot of misconception out there of what's going on, and somebody gets yanked out of a house and the neighbor comes out and, oh, the Ossining police are there, they were helping them, and it's again, a policy, yes, I agree, but there's a lot of misconception with that. And other than that, it's a lot to absorb here. I'm going to yield my time to my other colleagues.
I'm looking around. Manny, right?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to start off by saying thank you for everybody that actually has been working for several months on this. I really appreciate it, and I know how much time does take something like this takes to get accomplished. So I want to thank you for the free time that you have put on this and put them together. So one thing, we do have the presentation that was sent to us, but I was going to ask if the presentation that I will share with us today on the screen, is that possible to have it linked as well as part of the previous presentation? I think at least to me, it would be helpful because they're like bullet points of what the whole presentation was done. So if we can share that with the public, I think will be helpful on that. And I do have some couple general questions, I guess, but you know, we don't need to have answers right now. And it definitely seems that we have public meetings. You know, I would like to see what the rest of the participation of the community feels about all these issues within INTEG, within the whole itself. But one of the things that comes to mind for now is obviously a budget portion of this. If all these changes was going to happen, I saw some of the numbers in here, but I think on the overall, I think we need to understand what does that look like on a budget number. The other thing that I think Stuart was leading me into, you know, if we start changing some things, what does that look like for us? Sure. Because I know right now, the village of Ossining, when they hire a police officer, we do have a local list. So, and I heard the concerns of diversity. So to me is so what are we looking at? Sure. And I think that's a little bit more complex that I don't want to have, you know, I don't think we have the time to have just, because just on that topic, I think we can go for another hour at least alone. So I think that complexity is essential for us to understand what does that look like? What does that mean? And how do we want to do that? You know, so I think there's a couple more items in there that, but again, I want to hear the feedback from the rest of the community when we open this to a public engagement. And then we can, I think as a whole, as a village board, we can make a sound decision at that point. So I do appreciate everything that you guys have done. It's very helpful information. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm not going to repeat what's been said, first of all, except for the fact that we're very appreciative of committees. Most of our committees are appointed, and there was a lot of effort made to make sure that individuals that were appointed represented as wide a scope as possible. We're never in a diverse community like ours. You know, the mathematics of that is if we had 200 people, we still wouldn't represent every segment of the community. And even if we did, somebody will come and say, but you did it to represent me. And it's really tough because the job of the committee was not only to speak as themselves with their own history and their values. We had people who've lived here very few years to people who were born here, you know, and just a large gamut, which I think is going to be in the main report. But I think that overall, as I've spoken to some members, there's a feeling that, you know, the old saying that perfect is the opposite of good. You know, getting things good is really the goal here. And I think I have to say, I appreciate how much work went into this and the thoughtfulness. The idea of including the high school, the kids, I've not heard any municipality do that. Kudos. I don't know exactly who thought of it, but kudos to whoever did. Super important, super creative. So there's just a lot of creativity and creative thinking that went on. I will say that one of my expectation, Richard, is comments that use words like a lot. We know many municipalities do this, et cetera, et cetera. For me, it may just be my analytics, and maybe because I've done market research for 2 decades, words like we and a lot, when pushed means me, and I can't really give you the number. So I really am going to be looking for, when you say many municipalities do this, as Ian said, I'd like to have what municipalities do, whatever this is. When you say that, I'm sure you have it. It's fine. There are 500 of them in New York State alone, and then there are hundreds across the country. And you were talking about the country. This is a project about the police in the village of Ossining. And so I will be looking for commentary, not on the perception and perspective of the people on the working committee, plus the 800 plus that did the survey, plus the 200 that a person's perception, whether they grew up in Brooklyn and have a perception of police and then lived here, or grew up here and came back here, is their reality. That is not for me to question. So that I will not be questioning. But I will be looking for that what is focused on our ability and the lane that we travel in. And that, I think, starts going into what do you do with county? What do you do with states? What's in the PBA? What isn't? You know, we have to do that. I mean, it's expected. The people that elect us who aren't on the committee and didn't answer, so I expect that. But I'm going to be looking for personally, and I know you have it. And I'm looking at you, Richard, you can't tell because of this Zoom. And I know the committee thought a lot about this. So I want the public to also understand that as they come up with ideas, there may be something out there. I can think of a couple based on phone calls that I've already received that wasn't even addressed, that I think will be addressed in the public meetings. It'll be interesting how we may add it in or not. And at some point, I'm not doing it tonight, I'm going to ask the committee simple things like, what was your experience in this committee? I'd like to hear about that, just as members and constituents here. So I'm very interested in the way this all worked for all of the members. And I'm going to be very interested in some of the new things that may be presented and how we can bring this together, because it's complicated, but I'm absolutely going to stay in my lane. It's the village of Ossining, and the police at large, while important, I think the way the governor did it is not at the state level. I don't even know if the state police is under review. The way municipalities are, I don't even know if the state is actually looking at the state police and having this conversation. They're not? Well,
Not
that's
part
not
of the
nice.
executive order.
So they should do their own before they have every municipality do it. But I think the local law does fall in here, and we're going to look so that the arguments people might have is, why do you keep saying that our police guys and our cops, because many of them are from our community, they're our neighbors. Why do you say that they're this or that? And the answer is going to have to be, look, the lane that we're traveling in, and that's going to be really important, I think, to stay focused. The perceptions and all that, people's perceptions are their rights. It is exactly why we have committees. It's exactly why we tried as best we could. And when the mayor did the appointments, to include people who represent themselves, their neighbors, organizations that they may be a part of, their professional experience that they bring to the table, and everything about them into this fold. So I'm looking forward to the public parts of this. I also want to know what those hotlines were at the end. That last, who answers that hotline?
Oh, it goes to an answering machine.
I'm sorry?
It goes to an answering machine, that's all.
Yeah, okay.
They leave a message.
Who's collecting that information?
Our project team has reviewed them. Ian and I mostly have.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I want people to feel free that answer, and they can always do bot@villageofossining.org or any of the folks in the village, and it all comes to you guys. And I do appreciate, by the way, the website that was updated, because keeping up with you guys ain't easy. Guys did so much work that I think for the staff to also keep up with updating. But I think as we go into the public part, it will be very important, and this was brought up at the subcommittee, and I do want to bring the process up, that every revision that's done, that people don't react to an old revision. And I'm counting on you guys to sort of keep that in the right place. Thank you all for everything, and for staying up this late to listen to all of this. I know I'll be speaking to some of you in the next few weeks as well. So does anybody have a question for us right now? It's not a dialogue, usually the work session. I think the only thing we have to do, village manager and Stuart, is say that we're opening a public meeting, right?
Actually,
public hearing.
It's not a formal public hearing. So we're just noticing that there is a special meeting on the 6th, the 20th, and the 27th. That's all that will be. It will be noticed, and it is in fact being, the advertisement has already been placed with the Gazette.
Okay, so that's what we're doing tonight. We're hearing the presentation, and then we're noticing the next public meetings.
Correct.
Okay, that's all that we're needed to do. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
I have a question. Can you just,
I don't see who's speaking. Oh, there you are.
Hi.
Hi.
So the meetings on the 6th, the 20th, and the 27th are public meetings. But Stuart, did you say that the public cannot go on? Like they can't speak how I'm speaking right now, or they
You
can?
can at their Zoom meetings, Maite, but they're actually board special meetings. They're not steering committee meetings. These are not working committee meetings. These are board of trustee meetings. So they will be public meetings where the board will conduct the meeting and folks will be able to say whatever they have to say.
So people will be brought on to speak. Are you asking
Yeah.
whether people can speak and have?
Absolutely.
Yes, that's the purpose.
Right?
Okay. I just wanted to know because I think, many points, it's very valuable to hear from community members on how they feel in certain topics, especially when it comes to ICE and their perspectives on that. So yeah, I just wanted to know that.
Yeah, that actually is the goal of those meetings. I think, without putting words in Stuart's mouth, I think what Stuart's saying, it's not that Richard will be conducting these meetings or the working committee. You will be there. Officially, it's for the board to hear the public. Right. That is actually the entire purpose.
I want to just ask, Trustee White mentioned a concern that she had that some of the civilian oversight might be overlapping. So can I clarify the distinction between that governance board that we talked about and the CPCRB? And I think the third one that you were thinking of is probably the community liaisons.
Yeah, please. No, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I'm chair of the CPCRB as well. So our role in the village would stay the same. We review complaints when people make a formal complaint against the police department or a specific officer. We review those and we come up with a finding. And then, if for some reason there's a finding that that there was an issue that is substantiated, then that goes to the village board of trustees, and then you all make a decision about, whether to agree with that finding or not, and how to take action. So the idea of the governance committee would be to take some of that oversight that the village board of trustees does, because you all are so busy. I mean, we saw all the different presentations that we had today. You all are doing a lot for the village, and it's a part-time, a part-time job that you're doing alongside your full-time jobs. So the idea was that that would be a committee that either is appointed by the Board of Trustees, sort of like all the other committees that we have. So the CPCRB, the Zoning Board, all of those, and is specifically doing oversight over the police department. And that's why we would want trustees to be a part of it. Or because it's such an important thing, that it might be something where those are elected positions. And we realize that that's a very big change and would require quite a lot of legal maneuvering if we wanted to go that route. But it's really those two different options for the same purpose, which is to have a group that is more focused on the actual governance and not the day-to-day management of the police force, because that's really still the chief's position, but more of the top line stuff that it goes beyond just reviewing complaints. The liaisons would be sort of like the board that used to exist. I forget what it's called. I think it was a community engagement board that worked with the police. But this would be somewhat different in that it is a way so that the police department and the community have point people. So when the community has concerns, they can go to the police department. When the police have concerns that they need to bring to the community, they can bring that to those people, so that there's just always an open dialogue, which a lot of people felt like didn't quite exist. So that's what those three bodies would be.
Thanks. That helped a lot. Thank you.
Okay. I think, thank you all.